Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Neil Ullman. I'm an energy resource professional with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you for attending today's webinar on the Clean Truck Bus and Airport Equipment Request for Applications. We are recording this webinar and we will post it later to our DEQ website. And we will also post a copy of this slide deck and other information likely tomorrow to our DEQ Alternative Fuels and Transportation webpage. So feel free to ask questions if there's something that I say that you're not understanding, or you can also hold your questions until the end for the question and answer period that we've built in to the end of this webinar. First, a few logistics. We're pretty all Zoom savvy these last few years. But like I said, we are recording this. You've already been muted, but like I said, we can unmute you during key periods, or you can put questions into the chat feature of Zoom if you have a question either during the course of the webinar or at the end during our Q&A period. We hope to have about 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A time towards the end. I noticed we do have one person calling in from a phone. So if you do have a question during the course of the webinar, it's *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And also it's *9 to raise your hand so we know that you have something that you want to ask. At the bottom here is a link for Zoom support if you're having problems with Zoom at all. But I assume that if you're on here, you're probably doing just well. So we'll move on. First, I wanted to give some background on what is funding this Clean Truck Bus and Airport Equipment RFA. Some of you may be aware that several years ago, there was a national settlement called the Volkswagen Diesel Emissions Settlement. And it was an issue regarding cheater devices installed into a lot of diesel-powered Volkswagen vehicles. And there was a national settlement. Each state and other entities were designated as beneficiaries. The state of Montana, DEQ, was designated as the beneficiary for the state, and we received approximately $12.6 million for Montana. This funding goes primarily towards medium and heavy-duty diesel vehicles for replacements and certain types of repowers, as well as light-duty electric vehicle charging equipment. The goals of the settlement and of this program is to reduce mobile source NOx emissions. The NOx means nitrogen oxides, which can lead to respiratory and health problems for especially the young and the elderly and those with respiratory illnesses already, as well as to invest in clean alternative fuels and infrastructure and long-term air quality benefits. When Montana DEQ was identified as a beneficiary of this settlement, one of the things was we had to develop a plan on how we would spend those funds. We could spend up to 15%, or in our case for Montana, $1.89 million on EV charging infrastructure that's publicly available, as well as 15%, the same amount, on education, administration, and marketing. The rest of the money we decided would go towards direct vehicle projects, towards vehicle replacements and repowers across all the different eligible categories of charging infrastructure, or of vehicle replacements that the settlement provided for. So for this particular funding opportunity, the Clean Truck, which I'll refer to it as for the rest of the webinar, Clean Truck Bus and Airport Equipment. Again, the purpose is to reduce those nitrogen oxide emissions, those NOx emissions, improve air quality, and support investments in zero-emission transportation in the vehicles in the transportation sector. There will be a maximum cap on the amount of funding we make available for each project of $500,000, but with a certain cost share requirement as well that we'll get to in just a moment. Once you find the funding opportunity, and we'll give instructions on how to do that, the background and the goals of the Volkswagen and of this funding opportunity will be found on page 3. We've broken it out into several different eligible areas and categories for funding. The first two categories, categories A and B, deal with eligible on-road trucks and also transit and shuttle buses. Now, notice I said that I didn't include school buses. I'll explain school buses in a moment in a different category. But for these trucks and shuttle and transit buses, per the Volkswagen settlement, they are vehicles as 14,000 GVWR, gross vehicle weight rating of 14,000 pounds or more. So generally heavier duty vehicles, but also some lighter medium duty ones as well, like your Class A school buses that I'll get to in a moment, or shuttle buses, the smaller ones that are built on other vehicle chassis. So on the truck side, what we funded in the previous funding opportunity that we did with this a couple of years ago was we did fund 2 all-electric street sweepers, but we also got interest in questions about things like waste haulers, garbage trucks, courier delivery trucks, concrete mixers, all kinds of different vehicles that would qualify under the category A. And under category B, the shuttle and transit buses, we can do those vehicles as well, again, depending on their weight rating. And then also the Volkswagen settlement nationally also provided certain requirements for when the engine model year was. And so in the instance of both of these, the engine model year has to be between 1992 and 2009. Now, that's not to be confused, that is, with the vehicle model year. The engine, of course, is the one that makes the actual emissions. And so the Volkswagen settlement wanted to make sure that the engine model year fell within those within those model years. So make sure to pay attention to that as you continue to learn more about this funding opportunity, as well as the vehicles that you're looking at possibly replacing. For these two categories, we do allow for a number of different replacements under a number of different owned categories. So I'll start off with an example of a government-owned transit bus, let's say. So for a government-owned municipal transit agency that owns a transit bus, it has to be an older diesel bus. So any vehicle that's going to be replaced under this funding opportunity, with one exception I'll get to in a little bit for airport equipment, has to be diesel operated. It can be replaced under these two categories with a new, cleaner diesel vehicle or an alternate fuel vehicle, which for our purposes includes compressed natural gas, propane, and liquefied natural gas. Or it can also be replaced with an all-new zero-emissions all-electric vehicle or a hydrogen-powered fuel cell vehicle. For that government-owned transit agency, if they wanted to get a new transit or new diesel-powered transit bus, we could award up to 20% of the cost of that new diesel transit bus, 60% for a new alternative fuel transit bus. And I've seen across the country CNG, compressed natural gas powered transit buses, as well as a diesel hybrid, which would be another eligible alternate fuel replacement. So we could fund up to 60% of that cost. For an all new electric or hydrogen fuel cell, we could fund up to 85%. So depending on the cost of that new transit bus, may or may not depend on whether or not you're awarded the maximum $500,000 of awards. We can fund the lesser of, for an electric transit bus, for example, 85% or $500,000. So it kind of depends on the cost of your project. Only for the all-electric example could we pay for the cost of the fueling infrastructure, if you will, the electric charging equipment. If you decide to get into a new compressed natural gas, propane, or liquefied natural gas vehicle, we cannot pay for the cost of the fueling infrastructure for that particular type of fuel per the Volkswagen requirements, nor can we pay for diesel pumps, for example, but we can pay for the cost of the charging, and that would be included in the total cost. So you would take the cost of your all-new electric transit bus or garbage truck or street sweeper, add on the cost of installing and purchasing the charging equipment, and that would be all factored together in terms of the amount of the award that you would receive, the $500,000 or 85%. Category B is the school buses that I mentioned a moment ago. In this category, it can be engine model year 2009 or older. You'll notice that there is an old limit, if you will, of 1992. It's just anything that's old. So if you happen for some reason to still be running a 1975 engine model year school bus, now you can replace it. For this category, however, we're only allowing for diesel to electric replacements. Just in the last funding opportunity that we had for this a few years ago in 2021, we funded the first 11 electric school buses in the state of Montana, and 10 out of the 11 of them are operating school bus routes as we speak. The one is due to supply chain and delivery issues. Anyway, so we can fund up to 85% of the cost of that electric school bus. Now, if your school district contracts with a private fleet contractor to provide school bus service, then that either the school district or that contractor can apply to DEQ and qualify for the government-owned 85%. If you are a non-government, non-school district that doesn't provide government school district service, you can apply. If this is for some sort of private entity, you can apply and we can award up to 75%. In this case, electric school buses, in my experience, cost anywhere in the range of $350,000 to $400,000. And so in those previous funding opportunities we ended up awarding the school districts approximately $330,000 to $380,000-ish for the cost of their electric school buses. So under the $500,000, but then that meant we were also able to cover a large chunk of the charging infrastructure and installation for each of those buses as well.
It's a question about charging stations.
I can. Yeah. Thanks for the question about charging stations. We'll get to that in just a moment. This is the fourth and final category that I just want to make sure we touch on before we move into other eligibility issues. Airport equipment, AGSE, is how you'll see it referred to as in the request for funding, request for applications. According to the National Volkswagen Settlement, this is where that one exception is that it doesn't have to be diesel powered. In this case, it can be gasoline powered if you look at the requirements here that I lined out. And also, according to the National Volkswagen Settlement, the new equipment has to be electric powered. It cannot be any other type of fuel. It has to be electric. Fortunately, a lot of that electric powered airport equipment has been serving airports across the country and here in Montana for quite a while now. In our last funding opportunity 3 years ago, we did fund 3 electric belt loaders and 1 pushback tractor, which was on that first slide of the introduction of this presentation. Their costs are comparable-ish to their fueled counterparts, whether it's gasoline or diesel or something else. So that's great that if you're an airport authority or operate some other type of aircraft, that this can be, if you're already planning on getting new equipment, this would help offset the cost, but also not be about the same type of budget as if you're getting a new diesel powered one. This is for airport equipment that service the aircraft between flights. So if, for example, you're an airport authority and within the footprint of the airport, you also operate shuttle buses or snow removal equipment or other types of trucks or buses, that would qualify under category A of this funding opportunity. This is for the equipment that services aircraft directly. So things like those belt loaders and pushback tractors that I mentioned a moment ago. Going back to school buses real quick, I do want to flag for any school districts that are interested and have been thinking about getting into electric school buses that DEQ just released our Montana Electric School Bus Technical Assistance Program report that provided help towards school districts and the fleet operators that were the first in Montana to get electric school buses. As I mentioned earlier, our RFA 3 years ago, funded the first electric school buses. And then shortly after that, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, through its Clean Electric School Bus program, also provided funding to another 3 districts. And so we worked with those 6 districts, not wanting to just wish them the best of luck. We wanted to make sure that these buses were able to work and succeed, and that we were able to help them track the data so we could see what kind of benefits, if any, there were. And we did find benefits in terms of fuel cost savings. There were certainly some challenges with delivery issues and also making sure that the buses and the chargers themselves could operate. But we did find that there were benefits, that these buses could operate in the deep cold of -40-degree wind chill and colder in some instances. And so I would encourage people to go to DEQ's Alternative Fuels and Transportation page to find more information, read up on how those buses operated in Montana so far. To give some examples, though, on the different types of fuels that we can fund, including electric and alternative fuels and diesel, on some of these different platforms, I wanted to provide some information that we've put together and have tracked over the years using tools from the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as Argonne National Laboratory. This is, again, a school bus example. This is just the area that I've worked the most in over my last several years at DEQ. I'll also provide another example on garbage trucks here in a moment. But if you look at the different upfront costs, certainly battery electric vehicles are much, much more expensive than their alternative fuel or diesel counterparts. This funding opportunity hopes to help entities, school districts, and bus contractors to get into that at a lower amount. And once you do that, you start realizing immediately fuel cost savings and pollution emission reductions. If you look at diesel buses, for example, the ballpark range of how much a brand new diesel school bus costs is anywhere between 95-ish to probably closer to $120,000 now for a new diesel bus. A new diesel bus, according to Argonne National Lab, gets about 7 miles per gallon. I've seen higher numbers, but using that number from Argonne across the board, 7 miles per gallon is what they get. And if you look at the fuel costs, and I pulled fuel costs from the U.S. Department of Energy's fuel tracker. This was during the first half of July during the summer. So I would presume that they were maybe a titch higher because of 4th of July travel. But using that fuel savings or fuel economy and how much diesel cost about that time, fuel costs were about, or the fuel cost, the dollars per mile is about 55 cents. Now you compare that to some other types. You have a slightly lower fuel economy for a gasoline-powered school bus, as well as for a propane-powered school bus. But you also have, so the cost per mile is a little bit higher for the gasoline and for the propane. Where you get the benefits there, though, is again in the priority of the Volkswagen settlement is in terms of reducing those NOx emissions. And you can see massive reductions for both gasoline and for propane. For battery electric, there are a couple of benefits here. One is that I mentioned the 4th of July travel holiday and how much fuel prices tend to jump during those big travel periods. We got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up this fall and summer. And of course, during the summer, when I pulled these fuel costs, 4th of July, they tend to fluctuate quite a bit. And if you're trying to plan a budget, that can, I'm sure, be difficult for you to not know what the fuel fluctuations are going to be during the course of your school year or calendar year or your budget year. With electric prices, they generally stay pretty level. So that's good from a planning perspective. And when you look at the fuel economy, there's been a U.S. Department of Energy did a calculation to be able to determine what the equivalent is, because you're not burning gallons of any type of fuel in an electric vehicle. You're using up a battery, of course. But the MPG equivalent, MPGE, for a battery electric school bus is about 22.5 miles per gallon equivalent. And when you factor that in with today's, I use Northwestern Energy's rates from last month, which I think were about 14 cents. The fuel cost per mile is 0.6 of a cent per mile. So from a fuel savings, you're getting a great deal. You're also significantly reducing emissions. I will admit that for all the electric school buses that are currently operating in Montana, that they have auxiliary fuel heaters to help during the cold. They do use significantly less diesel than the drivetrain does on a diesel powered bus, but they are using diesel nonetheless. So there are emissions associated during the winter months with those electric school buses, so that it's not completely zero on the NOx pollutants during the winter months. But generally speaking, during the beginning of the school year, during the end of the school year, during the spring and summer, we saw with one school district from about March on till the end of the school year, they'd used no diesel for their electric school buses for the auxiliary fuel heaters. So they were truly zero emissions buses, which is a great benefit. The other example that I'll use on, yeah.
There was a question online about the EV number being off by 10 times. I'm not sure which EV number that's being referred to in the last slide. Alicia.
Oh, well, I'm using the example of, oops. Well, on the school bus side, it says here for battery electric that they cost anywhere in the ballpark of 290, which is actually probably extremely low, to 350. Like I said, it's probably closer to 350 to 400. I think in my calculations to estimate the fuel cost, I used closer to 350 as an estimate. Certainly other electric vehicles, heavier duty vehicles, which I was about to get to here in a moment with garbage trucks, can cost significantly more. Electric transit buses, for example, the ones that we funded through DEQ, through our Volkswagen funding, cost just a little bit less than $900,000, I think. So certainly they can be more expensive. Electric school buses are a little bit less expensive, but I will admit, of course, that they're significantly more than a diesel bus. But that's what we're doing here, is trying to help districts afford that so they can realize those fuel efficiency and air pollution savings during the lifetime of their buses. On the garbage truck side, which again would classify under category A of this funding opportunity, we can fund diesel, CNG, LNG powered garbage trucks, as well as battery electric. We guesstimate that a battery electric, actually, I was just doing some research to see what type of manufacturers are out there today, and they're actually probably closer to $600,000, maybe 700, depending on the make and model of the battery electric bus you go after. But again, these are significantly bigger vehicles. They get heavier, obviously, as you drive them. You're picking up more and more garbage and trash as you're going along your route. With a diesel, the fuel efficiency is very low. It's 1.7 miles. But again, it's a very large truck that gets heavier as you drive it during the course of the day. And so your fuel cost, again, using the fuel from early July, is about $2.27 per mile. And you can see there the annual greenhouse gas emissions as well as the NOx pollutant emissions for the all diesel. For CNG and LNG, the cost is a bit higher, not too terribly much. But again, if you're a local government, you're trying to make your local government dollars go as far as they can, making that jump can be challenging. So this funding opportunity is here to help you. The fuel economy is slightly better. The fuel cost is a little bit lower. And so you do get a lower fuel cost per mile for the CNG. LNG, I'm not sure why they said that LNG costs were so high. There isn't any liquefied natural gas being used in Montana right now, so far as I know, or the surrounding states. There are CNG powered garbage trucks being used by the city of Billings right now. I think that's the only CNG use being used in the state of Montana right now. But again, you can see the massive NOx emissions reductions. For battery electric, there are a number of manufacturers out there making battery electric garbage trucks. They are, again, significantly more expensive, but again, significantly more efficient. They get about 6.2 miles per gallon equivalent for the for the fuel economy. And then again, when you factor in Northwestern Energy rates, and this will change if you live in co-op country, of course, but using about that 14 cent per kilowatt hour rate that we pay here in Northwestern Territory, the fuel cost per mile is just over 2 cents per mile compared to those other ones. So again, you're getting a significant fuel emissions reduction there. The way that we're going to evaluate these is that when we did this 3 years ago, we had more money than we received applications for. The awards that we made 3 years ago were more total dollars than we have available in this current funding opportunity. This current funding opportunity has about $3.7 million available. So if we did all $500,000 awards, we could fund over seven. We could do just over 7 maximum awards. If we sprinkle in some airport equipment, which costs significantly less than that max $500,000 award, or school buses, then we can probably do in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 ish total awards, depending on the type of project. But assuming that because we awarded more money 3 years ago than we have available today, we are likely going to have to competitively score these applications, and this is what the scoring criteria will be. I've already talked about the NOx emissions, as well as achieving long-term air quality benefits. So depending on working with our Air Quality Bureau here at DEQ, we looked at some of the other air quality issues besides NOx emissions that we might want to take into account. We also are looking at the investment per the Volkswagen settlement in clean alternative fuels. So if you're doing an all-electric that has zero tailpipe emissions, then you're going to get a certain amount of points. Slightly less points is the alternate fuel vehicle options, and then also diesel would get slightly less points than that. So that would be another scoring criteria. Reducing diesel emissions exposure to sensitive populations. We obviously, like I said, with NOx emissions for the young, the elderly, and people prone to respiratory illnesses, we want to make sure that those people, to the greatest extent possible, are reduced from exposure from those NOx emissions. Also, if you look at a lot of major parking areas where you park medium and heavy duty vehicles, such as transit buses, they have been located in what's by and large a residential population area. And so, there's no businesses around, there's a whole bunch of homes, and all of a sudden a transit parking depot. And so reducing the diesel emission and exposure for those surrounding residents is going to be a priority. A project timeline, the more detail that you can provide, the better. Same with the project budget, to the extent that if you are doing an electric vehicle replacement, for example, if you can get an estimate on how much the cost will be to install the type of charger that you want to install, whether it's an alternate current AC level 2 slower charger or a direct current DC level 3 fast charger. There's going to be certain electrical requirements that you would have to add in all likelihood to your bus barn, your parking area, wherever it is that you keep your fleet of vehicles. So if you can provide as much detail as you can on that, on installation costs, the infrastructure cost itself for the equipment, as well as on the cost of the new vehicle that you're purchasing, that'll help increase your likelihood of getting a higher score. A maintenance plan, how you plan to deal with this new, which I assume for most entities would be a new type of technology. There are electric transit buses currently being operated right now only in Missoula with Mountain Line Transit and the University of Montana. Some electric transit buses are coming to Met Transit down in Billings soon, but haven't arrived yet from what I understand. Then there, of course, are the electric street sweepers and airport equipment and school buses scattered across the state. But by and large, this is going to be new equipment to a lot of you that may apply. And so a maintenance plan on how you're going to deal with this, because it will be slightly different. You don't have to deal with air filters or spark plugs or oil changes or DEF fluid if you're doing an electric. So how are you going to deal with any issues that might arise? Also, again, because we have a very finite amount of funding remaining for our Volkswagen settlement, the $12.6 million I mentioned earlier is not going to be, we're not going to get new funding from Congress or whatever from the Montana legislature. This is a one-time only thing from that settlement. So once it's gone, it's gone. And so if you have received funding previously, you may still apply for this funding, but if you have not previously applied, you'll get some extra points because we do want to spread this around the state of Montana as much as we can. This is a list of all the requirements that we're going to be requiring to be submitted as part of an application package for this. I'm not going to read through it ad nauseum. We list it several times in the funding opportunity, but just know that we will not be opening these until after the application deadline of January 31st, 2025. And so if when we open it, something is missing here, you will not be considered for funding. So make sure to go through this checklist several times before hitting send in our online system which I'll explain in a moment, where you'll submit your application. You have to use our application in order to submit an application. That's included in the RFA. We have had people, believe it or not, that didn't want to submit our application, submitted something else, and made us consider it because we didn't explicitly say that we had to use our application. So please definitely use our application and do all these other things too. We sprinkle throughout this slide as well as the RFA packet itself in parentheses, if applicable. So acknowledging that, for example, a belt loader, is only going to live at an airport for its entire life. It doesn't have certain things like a vehicle identification number plate, a VIN plate. It may not even have to be titled in the state of Montana. At least in my experience, it hasn't. If you don't have some of this information because it's not a requirement of you owning that particular piece of equipment or vehicle, then submit as much documentation as you can. If from that belt loader, you can get a picture of the serial number, the engine tag, definitely. If the engine tag is shaken loose during the course of the life of the older piece of equipment, try and find as much information as you can about the emissions family information for that piece of equipment, whether it's a belt loader or a truck or a bus or whatever. Get as much information as you can, and then also note in your application that you couldn't find the engine tag, that it's shaken off, or that there was no title, but here's your proof of ownership in lieu of that title. So explain that as much as possible. Another thing that you'll need to explain as much as possible in your application is that when the state of Montana agreed to accept the funding from the Volkswagen settlement, is that we didn't have to, but we decided to follow state procurement law. And one of the things included in state procurement law is that you, for a funding opportunity, provide at least 3 bids for the new vehicle that you want to get funded. Now, in some cases, getting 3 bids is not feasible because there aren't 3 manufacturers of that type of equipment that exist out there. There are more than there were 3 years ago when we first did this funding opportunity. So hopefully, as you're shopping around trying to find the different manufacturers of the vehicle or equipment that you want to replace, you should be able to find at least 3 ones. You may have a preferred one. In the school bus world, for example, some of the legacy long-term bus manufacturers that are out there that primarily operate here in Montana are Bluebird, Thomas Built Buses, and International or IC Bus. They all make electrics. They all make diesels. And so you can generally get quotes from all 3 of those. There are other manufacturers out there as well. Lion Electric is operating electric school buses for a number of school districts in Montana, and Green Mountain, I think, is another one out of West Virginia that makes electric school buses. But we found that it was hard 3 years ago to find more than one electric street sweeper manufacturer. And so in their applications, the successful local governments that applied for those said, listen, there's literally one manufacturer of electric street sweepers, and this is the one we want to go with. There's more now, same with garbage trucks and other types of trucks and airport equipment. So make sure that you document that if you can't gets a quote, or maybe the manufacturer is not willing or doesn't have the time to give you a quote, document that as well. If you have an email from them saying, just can't get this on my to-do list, or sorry, I'm not going to respond to this, then maybe include a copy of that email in your application package. I mentioned a moment ago that applications will be submitted or due by 2 p.m. Mountain. By that time, it'll be back to Mountain Standard, I think. I can never keep track. Anyway, 2 p.m. Mountain, January 31st, 2025. We're trying to give you as much time because we know that we're coming up on the holiday season. Probably a good chunk of December, you may not be able to get emails or calls back from these manufacturers or your electrician or your fuel supplier. So we're trying to give you as much time as you can to get your application package put together. We hope to make funding announcements within 30 days of January 31st, so probably around the beginning of March-ish is when we should be contacting successful applicants about our award decisions. If you have questions about how this is going to work, once you have time to review the request for applications, which again should be posted tomorrow on our Emacs system, and I'll get into more detail on Emacs in a moment. We will be doing a question period through 2 p.m. Mountain on December 6th, 2024. So if you have a question about, is this an eligible project, or my old vehicle, my old diesel has it's from a slightly older model year, or it operates for the Boys and Girls Club, or I don't know what the question might be, but whatever questions you have, we'll respond to them in as timely a manner as we can on DEQ's Alternative Fuels and Transportation page. We'll also post tomorrow a Q&A document that is still relevant from our funding opportunity 3 years ago. And in there we had things like what I already touched on about if the engine tag is missing or is not readable, is funding available for certain types of vehicles. One question we got 3 years ago was for a terminal tractor, yard dog type of thing that would work at a distribution center, like for Amazon or something like that. We'll post all of those Q&As to our website tomorrow. It'll also be included in our Emacs page. If you have questions, we strongly encourage you to post it in our Q&A section of Emacs. You can email them to our state procurement officer, whose email will be on our final slide here during Q&A, but we strongly encourage you to do it through Emacs. I will not be responding to any inquiries, questions, or other comments about this funding opportunity after this webinar. Again, with our state procurement laws, we found it best for me to be separate from those Q&A responses, so that'll all go through our formal process through our state procurement officer at DEQ, as well as our Emacs procurement system. So I will not be responding to any emails about this funding opportunity, period. So that brings us to the end. Rebecca Gregg at mt.gov, Rebecca.Gregg, I should say, at mt.gov, is DEQ's procurement officer. She will go through the formal process of responding to questions through our Emacs system. So all communications should go through her. None will be responded to by me or any other DEQ staff within the energy office, or in general for that matter. So please send all that information through there. As a reminder, applications are due January 31st. We expect that the contract, which we will include a draft of in the request for applications, the project activities should end or be completed by 20 months after execution of the contract, which we found was doable 3 years ago through our previous funding opportunity. And we have approximately $3.7 million available. I'm going to briefly show the funding opportunity or the Emacs page. Does that show up for you? Great. So this link will be provided on our Alternative Fuels and Transportation website. And so when you get to EMAX, which stands for, it says it right there, I suppose, Electronic Montana Acquisition and Contracting System. This is where we do a lot of things where the state of Montana acquires services. So the fact that we usually do that for services that we want, but we're doing it for a system of where we're giving away money to you, a potential applicant, will be a little different, but we have done it successfully for other funding opportunities in the past. Some things that I want to flag that as you familiarize yourself with EMAX is that you need to be registered. Now, even though you as the local government, school district, transit agency, airport, business, whatever, you are going to be referred to in EMAX as a vendor or a supplier. Now, you're not supplying anything other than the interest in getting into a new, cleaner vehicle or piece of equipment, but know that those terms will apply to you as the applicant to this funding opportunity. So you'll want to register here. I did it last week, even though I don't plan on providing any services to the state of Montana other than what I do now. So it was a pretty easy process, but make sure that you get all the right contact information for your staff, as well as the person who has authorization to sign off on a application to the state of Montana, whether that's your school district superintendent, your transportation director, whoever it is, make sure to get them involved in this system. Once you get into EMAX, and once we post this funding opportunity tomorrow, you'll go here to state bids and proposals and click on that, and then you'll search by Department of Environmental Quality will pop up. You'll search. Right now, there's 2 funding opportunities available, which I guess if you're interested, you can take a closer look. But anyway, clean truck, bus, and airport equipment will show up here tomorrow. So again, use EMAX or Rebecca Gregg as your point of contact in order to answer questions about how to navigate. If you go back to the main EMAX page, there's also information down here about how to submit a bid. Again, you're not bidding anything, you're applying for money, but it's the same thing. Responding to events, this RFA is going to be referred to as an event in EMAX. So again, some of this government jargon that's a little bit challenging to understand, just trying to help get you familiarized with that. So play around with the EMAX page and get familiarized with it so that you can be ready to submit your questions and eventually your proposal. So I'm going to stop there. I took more time because of the EMAX stuff than I did. I apologize for that, but I hope it answered some of your questions. And now I just want to open up to the questions that I've been neglecting throughout the presentation and see where we're at.
Do you want me to just read them off?
Yep.
There's a couple questions about if you've previously received funds. So one is about previously, can you use the funds to match previously awarded federal grants?
Oh, that's a good question. So this funding opportunity that we're announcing today is going to overlap with a currently open funding opportunity with the EPA's Clean School Bus program. And like I said, a number of school districts over the last couple of years have received funding for that. This funding can be used as match to those federal funding opportunities. So whether you're talking about the EPA's Clean School Bus program or the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle program, which they have not announced awards for yet from the EPA, or the Federal Transit Administration's Low-No program, this can be used as match against all of those. The only federal funding opportunity that it cannot be used as match against is the EPA's Diesel Emissions Reduction Act funding. So other than that, yes, in all likelihood, or it can be used as match against all of those federal requirements. Now, if you do apply before the application deadline of, I think it's January 6th for the EPA Clean School Bus program, and you say you want to get the maximum amount there, and then you apply to DEQ for the cost share, which let's just say would be, say, $55,000. You apply to DEQ for $55,000 and you don't get the EPA award, we cannot adjust your DEQ award. We cannot increase it. So we would only be able to give you that $55,000 that you requested. And so if you're not successful with the EPA rebate program, then we can't do anything about that. But if you already have an award in hand and you're looking for a way to pay the cost share of it, then yes, this Volkswagen funding can offset the federal funds.
This one was from earlier. What charging station levels are eligible for funding? L2 or DCFC or both?
Sure, Claire. So either is the short answer. And we've seen electric school buses and electric street sweepers and airport equipment operate with either. At the time that we funded this 3 years ago, the only electric street sweepers, and this gets to a question from anonymous attendee about what street sweeper manufacturers are available. The only one 3 years ago was a company called Global Environmental. And at the time, they only offered level 2 AC charging. Since then, Elgin, which is used, I see around here in Helena all the time, both from MDT and the city of Helena, they now operate the electric Broom Bear. I believe there's other sweepers available since 3 years ago. There's also more electric garbage trucks available. The legacy makers like Mack and Peterbilt make them, as do Lion Electric, which also does school buses, which I mentioned. So you can do either level 2 or level 3. What you also want to consider, though, is your use behavior for the vehicle that you're getting. We found that, with level 2 charging, this is charging that, like, I do it at my house for my car overnight. It charges up overnight. I'm not in a hurry to go anywhere overnight because I'm sleeping. And so it doesn't matter that it's taking several hours for my car to charge. Same thing with school buses, where you can charge them up during the middle of the day while the students are in class, or overnight while the buses aren't being used. You're not in a rush to get those buses charged up. But with the street sweepers, for example, if they run multiple shifts during the day, or a garbage truck for that matter, and you do need to get them charged up quickly, then you need to figure out whether or not you need to have that capability or not, and pay very close attention to the purchasing specs when you're getting your bus or sweeper or garbage truck or whatever spec'd out. Make sure that it is capable of accepting DC fast charge and or AC level 2 charging. So the short answer, Claire, is that either is eligible, but make sure that you're paying attention to what the different makes and models offer for sale.
Terry asked a question that you alluded to has been asked before about whether the program funds replacement of diesel-powered terminal trucks at airports.
Well, Terry, if you want to clarify, I'll try and answer based off of this and the way I understand it. So, Orange EV. And I feel like, Terry, that you guys asked the same question 3 years ago. So yeah, if there's a truck that's operated by an airport that serves just the airport, doesn't do delivery stuff like that, outside of the airport footprint, then yes, that would qualify for funding under category A. Same thing as if it was working at a distribution center like Amazon or Albertsons or Safeway or whatever, if they have some sort of hub where you're moving trailers from one bay to another. Those yard dogs, drayage trucks, they're referred to as at ports, would be eligible. Same thing at airports, but they would qualify under category A. Again, category D for airport ground support equipment is only equipment that directly services an aircraft in between flights. So, and I guess I would have a hard time Like if you have a truck, like one of those trucks that have the thing that elevates in order to deserve a new course of food for the return flight. I guess I don't know if that would qualify. I would tend to say just apply under category A because it's not really necessary to get the flight off the ground. But um, anyway, if you want to ask a more detailed question, either in the chat or through our Emacs procurement Q&A board, I would encourage you to do that.
And then there was just a clarification to maybe double check the math on the EV cost per mile. But I think we can do that at a different time. Do the purchases have to meet Build America, Buy America under this funding opportunity?
No, but if you are using this money to match federal funding, like the FTA's Low-No or EPA's Clean School Bus, then you would have to comply with any BABA requirements for the federal funding, but BABA does not apply to Volkswagen.
Can you share any information about new vehicle deployment timing? Is there a date you are going to require vehicles to be delivered or in operation?
So on this slide here, Claire, you can see that project completion date is scheduled for 20 months after execution of the contract. What the overall timeline is for this funding opportunity is that applications are due January 31st, 2025. We hope to make award decisions within 30-ish days after that, so around the beginning of March. If awards are accepted, then part of the Volkswagen process is that we draw down the money from the settlement trustee that's being held after the settlement, after Volkswagen paid its fees, fines, whatever, as a result of this settlement. And that process to draw down from the trustee is a 60-day process. And we're not going to execute a contract that we don't have the money to back up. So while I don't anticipate that during that 60-day process, after awards are accepted, that there will be a problem drawing down the money from the trustee, we technically want to make sure that we have that money in hand before we execute a contract for $500,000 or however many dollars with you. And so once those funds are drawn down, if we did that immediately after awards are accepted in the beginning of March, let's say it takes until the middle of March to start requesting those funds to be drawn down, April, May, mid-May is when we would potentially have those funds in our accounts here at DEQ. And then we would start the process of executing those contracts. So hopefully by the beginning of June, we would have a contract executed with successful applicants, and then project activities could start. So on that guesstimated timeline that I just gave you, Claire, 20 months from the beginning of June 2025 is when you should have project activities completed. And that includes delivery and acceptance by you of the new vehicle that you're purchasing, as well as destruction of the old vehicle. Another requirement of the Volkswagen settlement is that whatever vehicle is being replaced has to be destroyed and no longer ever used. And that includes both the engine and the chassis. And we generally go by with what EPA has done in some of its previous funding opportunities and what we've done in our previous Clean School Bus program that we haven't had for a couple of years now, but generally we require at the very least for the chassis rails to be cut in half and at least a 3-inch hole drilled into the engine block of the bus that's being replaced. You can also, with the EQ approval, ask if you can take it to the junkyard and have it ripped apart by a claw. We generally approve that. But if there's something else other than cutting the chassis in half and drilling a hole in the engine that you want to do, you need to contact DEQ first before you get that approved. But that is, all those things, Claire, are things that you need to get done within that 20-month window. And we were able to get that done with most of the projects that we funded 3 years ago. I say most, Electric medium heavy duty vehicles were in even more of a new phase 3 years ago than they are today. It's more mature now, but 3 years ago, with the global pandemic and global supply chain issues, it took a little bit longer. And also because some of these things that were being deployed in Montana were the first things ever, the first electric street sweepers, the first electric school buses. So making sure that they're road legal also was another learning curve that we didn't anticipate. We feel like that with OPI and MDT or NVD, we ended up figuring some of that out. So it should go along pretty smoothly within 20 months. And that was kind of developed as an average amongst funding opportunities that local governments responded to in a request for information that we did a few years ago, and seemed like it was a pretty good sweet spot for when activities could happen.
I had provided a link to the fuels page on the DEQ website to look at the electric school bus technical assistance report, but John was asking if you had information about how far a fully electric bus can travel before needed to be charged in rural Montana.
Sure, for an electric school bus, John, and depending on, I've talked about garbage trucks and transit buses and other things today, but if you're asking specifically about school buses, most of the school buses currently operating in Montana went with the base level battery pack that those manufacturers operated. With Lion Electric, they went with the smallest, lowest battery pack that can get them about 100 miles in optimal range. One school bus fleet that we funded went with the largest battery pack, which I think can take the bus, I think it's well over 200 miles per range. But also 100 miles, when you look at the majority of school bus routes in Montana, their combined morning and afternoon routes are less than that. Some are more, I won't deny that. And so electric school buses may not be the right answer for those longer daily routes. But what we found, even in the harshest cold, like this past January, where it got down to -40 wind chill, and in the previous, in December of 22, where it also got down to -40 in certain parts of the state, we still found that the buses operated fine. And even in some cases, they didn't need to operate or charge up during the course of the school day. Because it's probably going to be new technology to you, you're probably going to want to play around with it a little bit and see how much charge you use during the morning route. Making sure that you have more than enough charge to get you through the afternoon route. But we found that the performance of these vehicles is way more than the charge is way more than you need for most school routes across the state of Montana. And the school districts ended up feeling like they could get away with more, and actually found benefits to driving the bus to a lower state of charge than they thought they would be otherwise comfortable with. Getting down into the 40% or even 30% range actually provides some benefits in terms of regenerative braking that being at a higher state of charge doesn't provide. So the buses are operating great so far. We have had some sensor problems and other things, problems with the chargers, which have mostly gotten worked out. So hopefully that technical assistance report will answer your questions, John.
This might be the last question that we have time for, and we can maybe follow up with the other specific questions. Will the RFA guidelines be posted on the program page or only in Emacs?
Only in Emacs, Julie. So make sure to do it through there. Like I said, we will be posting that tomorrow so that you can get more information on the eligibility requirements. But this will all be done through Emacs just because we found it to be a better way for us to put out these competitive grant dollars than we have in years past. So that's probably the one biggest change from 3 years ago. Chris, I see you have a couple of questions here. A lot of the stuff that you're asking here is going to be the same as 3 years ago. So the answers, But like I said, we will, on the alternative fuels page of DEQ, we'll post a link to Emacs so that you can then find the RFA. We'll also post the Q&A from 3 years ago. We'll post the slide deck and a recording of this video as well, of this webinar, so that you can review it and get as much information as you can about eligibility information and requirements. Sorry, we keep looking over. I think somebody might need to use our conference room, but we might be okay now. So John, yeah, they can climb a snow hill, but depending on, you may want to ask some of the other school districts across the state how they feel like their buses are operating, but I feel like that they would tell you that they were operating pretty good even in the snow and on gravel and on dirt. Chris, I think it's what you want to get delivered. To your question, if I wanted to replace a plow/dump truck, I think it's whatever is getting delivered to you. So if you have to order, if the chassis and the cab are coming from Ford or whoever, and then somebody fits it with the plow and the dump truck, I think that whatever it is you can justify in there of what you're getting delivered to you as your new vehicle makes sense. If there are cost savings of being able to use the old plow attachment and you don't have to order a new plow, then great. But I would get the sense that if you're getting rid of an old truck that has a plow attached to it, and you're getting a new truck with a new plow attached to it, that all of that would likely be eligible costs. But you might want to submit a question sometime after tomorrow through Emacs just to clarify that, because I haven't thought of some of that. But I think, if we're paying for a garbage compactor on a garbage truck, why wouldn't we pay for a plow on the front of a truck for a snow plow? So yeah, I think whatever it is that you want to order is probably eligible for requirements. Now the one exception I would say, as I'm thinking through that, is that into some of John's questions and concerns as well on electric school buses, is electric school buses are not activity buses. This is not what you get the football team in, travel across the state to go to the state tournament. These are route buses. They do their job well for fixed route where you know where they're going to be at all times and they're close to the charging they need to be. So driving them across the state is not the best idea. Even if you have local activities that you like to take them to, they'll probably still work depending on how far away those local activities are. But in all likelihood, we will not fund luggage racks or luggage compartments, entertainment systems like a TV or a CD player, if that's still a thing, or a DVD player. So some of those extra bells and whistles, we would probably have a hard time justifying funding. But the bells and whistles, if you want to use that term, to Chris's question about snowplows, that to me seems integral into the operation of the snowplow, especially if you're getting rid of the plow along with your old truck. So anyway, post those specific questions, but hopefully that helped both John and Chris. And John, I think actually because of the demand from the federal funding opportunities with the EPA Clean School Bus Program, I think that the demand right now is for electrics. And so I think that those are being pumped off the manufacturing line quicker than diesels, because those diesels aren't being demanded given the federal funding right now. So I have found that with some of the EPA funded electric school buses, those arrived within, this is information from maybe 2 years ago, but they arrived, I think, within 8 to 10 months-ish. Anyway, again, when you're going out to get quotes and get more information about the capacity, then you should definitely ask who the vendor that you're getting that quote from about delivery times and charging speeds and capacities and things of that nature. Yeah.
Not sure if you got both of Chris's remaining questions, but those are the only ones that.
Chris's question was one that he had a few years ago too, on an application that he submitted, successfully was awarded. That same process still works for us, and I can't remember the name of it now. I just listened to it, the webinar 3 years ago on that question, the online bid system that you do. Anyway, whatever it was that you used 3 years ago still works. And if you're a local government like Chris asking that question, yes, thank you, Chris. Sourcewell still works for us. Chris, through the city of Helena, got funding for an electric street sweeper. And again, there was only one vendor manufacturer at the time, but it was easier for them to go through Sourcewell. And after a little bit of consideration, we said that that was an acceptable way of getting a bid. So we can do that. Again, this time around, even though there are more vendors, just make sure to shop around, Chris. Again, I don't know if you're going for another electric street sweeper, but if there's one where there's a slightly finite universe of manufacturers, just make sure that you cover your bases, but Sourcewell will work this time.
And then did you answer his question about supplementing for applying for funding for equipment that we already have on order but have not received?
Yeah, so if you have already ordered or even purchased and received a truck or a bus or a piece of airport equipment, it is not eligible for funding. None of those activities can happen until after we've executed the contract between DEQ and you, the entity. So if you've already placed your purchase and you want to apply for this funding opportunity, I would recommend that you either cancel that purchase order or find a different vehicle or equipment to replace that would be eligible under this funding opportunity. But anything that's been ordered so far or even been delivered and paid for so far is not eligible for funding under this.
Those are all of the questions that came in. So I would just recommend that anyone else submit their questions on Emacs.
John, Alicia Cox, who just offered that in the chat to help you with electric school buses, is with the Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities Coalition based in Jackson, Wyoming, but does do significant work in Montana. And I would just give a plug for Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities that helped a number of successful applicants for this funding 3 years ago to help calculate some of those emissions reductions. I know that a lot of you, especially fleet managers, don't usually try to calculate emissions. And so that can be something complicated and new for you. Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities, if you Google them, can offer some help on technical assistance to do those calculations and also drive you towards case studies and examples of some of these vehicles working in different parts of the country in our region. So I'd encourage you to reach out to Alicia after this webinar. John, it's Yellowstone-Teton, so Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities, and it's a organization that's in part funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, but this is our regional one here, and it's ytcleancities.org. Alicia just put in the chat. So anyway, and you can also go back and see some of this in the recording. But yeah, Google Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities, and they can also help you too. So I think that gets us to the end. Like I said, I will not be communicating with anybody that may or may not apply for this funding until after award decisions have been made. Please direct all of your questions and comments through the Emacs system. Ask the Emacs customer support or whatever it's called for assistance on how to register and how to respond to an event. And once you get into the event and once it's posted tomorrow, Tuesday, the 23rd, 22nd, thank you. Then post questions to our Q&A board in the Emacs event. And I will be in touch with successful applicants, hopefully the end of this coming winter. So I thank you all for participating, and I look forward to reading some very interesting applications this winter. So thanks again, and have a great rest of the week.